Today's workshop is Special Education Rule Changes Series, Part 1, Rule Change Implementation. I will be presenting along with Anna Russo, the Inclusion and Accessibility Coordinator at the Vermont Agency of Education, and Cassie Santos, the Inclusive Practices Coordinator at the Vermont Agency of Education. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Anna Russo. I am with the special education team at the Vermont Agency of Education. And today for a few minutes, I'm going to show you a few pieces in the side-by-side of the special education rules of the previous rules, the rules effective until June 30th of 2022, the 2013 version you see on your left, and the rules effective as of July 1st of 2022. So right here on page 6, this part in the new rules that are effective July 1st, the definition of special education was essentially defaulted to the federal definition with the exception of the co-teaching provision. While the rule itself is fundamentally the same, it places a greater emphasis on special education as specially designed instruction. So you can see this rule here for the full definition of specially designed instruction. And then jumping over to a new page, page 16, if you may. This section, you can see the adverse effect section. Vermont will be returning to the eligibility definition of adverse effect in line with most other states, a definition which relies on evidence-based results, continuous progress measures, as well as other examples of student work, including the effect of functional skills deficits, which demonstrates that the student's disability has a negative impact on their basic skill or basic skill development. Rather than wait until students fall into the lowest 15th percentile of their grade level peers, earlier identification can possibly be made, resulting in the provision of more timely and appropriate support and services for students in need. With this change, the Vermont Agency of Education predicts that the discussion of when and how students most appropriately get their educational and functional skill needs met becomes the focus rather than meeting an operational standard. To this end, in addition to the basic skill areas, the new regulation includes functional performance as a basic skill for evaluation and planning teams to consider when documenting adverse effect for a student. Not getting into the functional skills right now, but just for reference, when we talk about basic skills area under adverse effect, this is where the functional skills were added. I also want to jump to page 17. So here you can see where under basic skills, perfect. This is where it was added when considering adverse effect. That is also a change that is occurring in this section of the rules. Jumping down to page 19. On page 19, you can see the section related to additional procedures for identifying children with specific learning disabilities. I know our final session in this series is going to dive deeper into that. So I wanted to point you to where those rules lie. On page 20, perfect. For the content of the IEP, there are some additions to the use of specific data that will be used to assess goals progress and the use of data to inform the development of appropriate goals. And on the final page, page 20, sorry, not the final page, but going down one more. Uh-oh, I think I lost my place. Yes, page 20. Oh, if you go up one page. Sorry, I totally misled you there. Parental input So the final section I want to highlight today is the parental input section, that the IEP shall contain section for parents to provide written comments. And here and into the next page, you can see the rule changes related to parental input. Yep, perfect. We can post the link to the rule changes PDF in the chat, as well as Cassie is going to show you where this document lives in our website. Thank you so much.
Okay, so the next part of the presentation will be going over some FAQs and Mythbusters. So I think we can stop this screen sharing for now. Okay, so our Mythbusters and FAQs will be about the parts of the rule that have already gone into effect. So as Anna had said, and most of you know, that we have 2 other parts of our series that will cover what we will not be covering today. So we'll start with our FAQs Mythbusters. So what we're hearing from families as these rules that we're talking about today have been in effect for almost a year. Schools are developing their own version of the parental input page, which does not contain the same information that is on the AOE form that we can see on the website.
So for everyone's knowledge that, we do create those forms, and all that's required of those forms for districts is that they elicit feedback from parents. They don't have to use the form that we've created. They may choose to expand that form or use it as is, and that is up to the LEA.
Is there any information that has to be retained, Cassie?
In terms of, yes, so it should at the very least elicit the same information that our form would be eliciting. And what I could do, which might help, or Anna, if you could put in the chat the link to where those forms live, that would bring everyone to form 12, and that would give you an idea of what has to be on the form at a minimum.
Okay, so we've heard also from parents that some schools would only take input during the meeting. Families wanted to compile their thoughts and email before or after the meeting. We're told that schools couldn't accept comments before the IEP meeting, but only during the meeting.
So per the law, the district is required to give parents 10 days to fill out the feedback form for it to be incorporated into the IEP. However, parent feedback really should be accepted and considered throughout the entire process. It just might not be embedded in the IEP in the same capacity when we're thinking about Form 12 specifically.
Okay, so families get a prior written notice and the deadline for the form comes after. So sometimes it feels like parental input is useless. What is the point of submitting input when it feels that the document is final?
Right. Well, the form is intended to support LEAs in inclusion of parents throughout the IEP development process. It is expected that this form is shared with parents either at the IEP meeting or immediately after, so that parents can share their feedback about this process. But really, parent feedback as a separate component in terms of, interpretation of strengths, goals, services, that should be considered by the LEA at all times, right? These are working documents and conversations that the team should be having. This might lead to an amendment of the IEP itself when we're talking about parent feedback, or considering developing, another goal related to parent feedback. But the Form 12 specifically is feedback on that IEP meeting, on that process that just happened. And then parent feedback in general is separate from that, and again, should be included throughout the whole year or the whole process of a student being on a plan.
Okay, we've heard from parents that sometimes schools have a blanket policy of no draft IEPs being issued. No information would be accepted prior to the meeting. And then we've also seen it change to must be requested 2 weeks in advance of the meeting. So all of this is a little confusing to parents.
Sure. So per law, no one party should come to the meeting with a drafted IEP, but all members, including the parents, can bring ideas, thoughts, examples of what could be included in that IEP. It's also not unfounded to have conversations with IEP teams if students are progressing and maybe have to have their programming updated a little bit. Essentially, the AOE encourages LEA and parents to discuss the students' progress and needs throughout the year, not isolated to annual IEP meetings.
So this is more of a comment because we know that in other states practices are different, but we have had parents ask us about the signing of the IEP that a parent could be asked, or that is a requirement of IEPs in other states, that the IEP be signed.
Sure. And so in our state, the only required signature is on that attendance form and then on the agreement to bill Medicaid if applicable.
So can an email or text from a parent with the parental input be used to fulfill this rule requirement?
We would say that email could certainly be used to fulfill this requirement, and individual schools might choose to allow this to be obtained via a text message, but best practice would really be to give this feedback in writing or via email.
Okay. Can a parent get guidance from the AOE or from VFN with writing parent input statements?
So the AOE has published a parent input guidance document, and I'm going to lead everyone to where that is when we look at the resources page, which is coming soon. But there really is no prescribed structure to how a parent provides this information. As long as it's submitted within those 10 days, it will be included in that special section of the IEP that's intended for the Form 12.
So for the VFN part, I would say that we always encourage parents to call us on our helpline, and we can perhaps help a parent to, organize their thoughts so that they can relay what they have characterized as what is important for their parental input. But as Cassie said, there's no specific format that has to be followed. So is the AOE checking, or does the AOE plan to check on districts' implementation of this rule?
So the general supervision and monitoring system is the AOE's approach for monitoring, documenting, and enforcing accountability of the implementation of IDEA and any state rules. And so in the course of the general supervision activities, this would be an area that, yes, we would be looking at.
Okay, so what if a parent misses the deadline for sending the parental input? What happens then?
So you have 10 days to fill out that form related to the parent feedback on the IEP process. And if that document is received within those 10 days, it's required to be incorporated into the IEP. If you have feedback specific to this component beyond the 10 days, LEAs can choose to incorporate it into the document, but are not required to. And I again want to separate out that that's specific to the Form 12, the feedback on the IEP process. Parent feedback in regards to programming and goals and services is an ongoing conversation that teams should be having.
So who is allowed to provide my child with special education or specially designed instruction?
So an IEP might be implemented by many different people throughout the school setting, special educators, related service providers, interventionists, paraeducators, general educators with the support of the special educator. It can be provided by all those listed above, and that's up to the individualized plan and team in terms of who's delivering that specially designed instruction.
Okay. Should goals in my child's 2022 to 2023 IEP have been revised this year, or did districts have the option to begin meeting the IEP goal requirement at the next or annual IEP meeting?
They can choose to wait till that next or annual IEP meeting. If the IEP was implemented before July 1, 2022, the goal can still stand and doesn't need to be rewritten to meet the requirements that became effective after that goal was originally written. But any goals written this year after July 1 should adhere to the rule changes.
We have a question, if I may interrupt. Someone just wrote, I have a meeting on May 31st. Will the new laws hold true to the meeting if it meets within the 10 days of the meeting?
Is this related to the parental input form?
Yes.
Yeah, so that one has gone into effect last year. And so we should be giving the parent input form and allowing 10 days.
Thank you.
So, yes, and this is the last one on our list. What is the policy on visiting your child in their classroom?
So there is no state legislature or laws that require or prohibit families from visiting their students in the classroom. This is really something that we would recommend following up with your student's individual school and or classroom for these policies, as they really might be different school to school and classroom to classroom.
Okay, that ends this part of the sort of prepared FAQs, but again, please feel free to put your questions in chat. We will still be addressing some questions that came in during the period of registration, as well as any new questions that you might want to ask. So the next section will talk about what resources are available to families who have concerns about this rule implementation. And I believe we'll be sharing some, yes. So Cassie or Anna, did you want to go over the AOE resources?
I think, Anna, are you doing this one, the resources for families?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry about that. I was trying to figure out where my unmute went. Yes, so this is our special education resources for families, and we can post the link to this in the chat. So on this page, you can kind of see bulleted and linked. They will drop you right down to the specific section. Information around like the roles of parents in special education, and all the way down to other state agencies and departments supporting families with children with disabilities. So scrolling down just a wee bit, I want to point out the first section. Perfect. So this is the role of parents in special education. And if you scroll down a little bit farther, there's a few links that you can open up. So the rights of parents of students with disabilities, the notice of procedural safeguards, the rights of parents with students with disabilities, the Vermont special education rules, and special education parent resources. And going down the rest of this, there's some helpful resources related to acronyms, which are used a lot in many of these meetings. So this quick little list of acronyms of technical terms can help parents kind of swim the waters. We also have resources related to Act 173, alternate assessments, which is an assessment for about 1% of our student population. Dispute resolution, mediation, due process, and administrative complaints. That has its own link to its own website, so you can farther look into that. English language learners in Vermont, hazing, harassment, and bullying, restraint and seclusion, Rule 4500. And then this is kind of where it leads you to those state agency and departments. And we have linked here many of them that you can find that can also help provide support and services to your student. Thank you.
Okay. And yeah, Rachel, you can just pull up our website, the VFN website.
I think, Karen, next we're doing, or maybe not, I was going to do the rule changes one really quick, the special education changes.
Okay.
If that's okay. We're going to do a little walkthrough of this other page, guys, which the link is in the chat. Rachel added in all these links for you guys. So this is our resources page on the AOE website. This is the page that houses all the resources that have been created since September 2021. And as you can see at the top here, it gives a little background. It identifies some of the items on this page. Can we scroll down just a little bit, Rachel, to the technical assistance piece that says we have webinars, guidance documents, checklists, and templates. And then at the top is this monthly session schedule where you can sort of toggle to each month of resources if you know where you want to go. But we probably don't know yet where we want to go. So for our purposes today, we're going to briefly scan through each month just to show everyone what lives here. So This does organize the resources from oldest to newest. So the resources that were initially released by the AOE start here at September 2021. That's this webinar. It sort of sets the stages for the rule changes in Act 173. As you can see, a slide deck is under it, and that's true for every webinar. So Rachel, if we just keep scrolling down to that resources, it says, go right there, resources. Underneath some of the webinars, you'll find that there's other resources related to that month's topic. So that's going to bring you to the guidance documents, checklists. The side-by-side lives there, and I'll show you guys where that is. So now scrolling down to October 2021, another webinar here that was created by our MTSS team. And then if we continue to scroll down to November, that's where you're going to see the webinar dedicated to the changes related to parent input. A lot of these webinars are pretty, 10 to 15-minute watches. They're going to give you a lot of that, the information, and then it's supported by those additional resources. So if you just scroll down, Rachel, to that resources section, you'll see there's more resources there to support parent input, case studies, a sample parent letter, a guidance document. Then also under November, we're getting into this webinar here where it says special education definition. That's going to get into specially designed instruction. If we scroll down a little more, Rachel, we're coming down to the goal writing resources. This is going to give 3 different webinars for people to understand some of the changes here. And then scrolling down to resources, Rachel, you'll see that there's, keep scrolling. There's some goal writing templates down there, some strategies, some guidance documents. And now we're going to go to December 2021. Here there's a webinar for functional skills along with guidance to support that rule change. Under January 2022, we're going to see a webinar to support adverse effect. And then under those resources, guidance document, eligibility deliberation form. And now scrolling down to February 2022, again, another webinar. Now we're looking at specific learning disabilities and eligibility without the discrepancy model. There's a ton of resources in this month to support this process, guidelines, FAQs, team member responsibilities, and fillable forms. Under March 2022, you're going to see some more resources available for MTSS, specially designed instruction. And under that section, that's also where the side-by-side lives. So if you just scroll down a little more, Rachel, you'll see there state board rules side-by-side. That's where that document lives that Anna was covering earlier. So then for April 2022, May 2022, we'll just keep scrolling through those. There's some slide decks linked there. And then getting into July 2022, you're going to see there is an office hour there held to support the Andrew F standards. And then in August 2022, there's a recording from the office hour that was intended to support parents with special education forms. So that's all we have for 2022. And then you'll notice there's a break, and that's where we start back up again in March 2023. Currently, we've been holding office hours bi-weekly to support different topics related to the rule changes, and those resources can be found here under March 2023, April 2023, and soon to be postings under May 2023. Again, these are the newest resources here at the bottom. And our last office hour is tomorrow, where we're talking about specially designed instruction. So that content will eventually be posted there under May 2023. So that is that special education resource page. I realize it's a lot to take in. There's a lot of resources on that page to support districts and hopefully parents. But I did want to take a moment here just to foreshadow that next week we're going to dive into some of this a little more, talking about adverse effect and functional performance. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of these resources that exist. That's all I have for this page. So I'm going to turn it back over to Karen. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm just reminding parents and professionals that at VFN, we have our helpline. So parents are always welcome to call us when they have specific questions about their child's IEP, eligibility, all the pieces that we've been talking about. We also have our workshops that, as I mentioned at the beginning, are taped and archived. And we actually do have a workshop that was done by Disability Law Project on the rule changes back in the fall. So that is available. And also just to remind folks that we do have fact sheets that are also available on our website on a variety of topics on special education. So Cassie, did you want, you started previewing the next session. Did we just want to also mention how the remaining 2 sessions and what they'll be covering before we go to questions?
Absolutely, yeah. So next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about adverse effect and functional performance, again, using some of the content that we've already shared with districts, and then also just trying to take the lens of what you as parents might need. And then the week after that, we're going to have some folks from our MTSS team join us at this presentation, and we're going to talk a little bit more about specific learning disabilities and MTSS. We really appreciate getting questions ahead of time. It really helps us to know what you all need and are seeking. So please continue to send questions in. And next week we'll do a deeper dive into some of the specifics related to adverse effect and functional skills. And I'm gonna turn it back over to VFN. And I think we're moving into our Q&A.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm going to be reading off some of the questions. The question that just appeared in the chat, and then I'll go to the earlier ones, was, bear with me, can a student with high functioning cognition but clear deficits in functional skills only qualify for special education? Based on the rule changes, there is now more clarity in this area.
So this is one of the rule changes that will go into effect July 1. Functional skills will be added as a basic skill area under adverse effect. And yes, then a student who is seeing adverse effect in functional skills could be eligible under that basic skill area as if adverse effect is shown.
Great, thank you. The next one is a comment. The K through 12 Special Education Evaluation Guide under August 2022 is awesome and user and parent friendly. I just thought I'd inject that one before we bounce to the next question. The next question is, what does our race and ethnicity have to do with our child's well-being and education?
So I'll answer that. And I assume that that question came up from our registration. And it's just to let everyone know that as long as any entity receives federal funding, and VFN does receive federal funding, that is a question we are required to ask. It is always optional for families whether or not they want to answer that question. But for reporting purposes, I would say all entities are required to ask about a person's race and ethnicity.
Thank you. And then the next question is, are there any tips on words to use to communicate about this to our school district as far as the changes?
So related to the rule changes, as you saw, Cassie was showing the webpage, schools have been having professional development related to these rule changes for, I think, over a year and some. So they are aware of these rule changes. So I don't know if VFN has anything additional for that one.
Yeah, and I think maybe a reason that the question came up is that we have heard parents say, well, does the school really know about these changes? And is it my responsibility to give them the information? And really the answer is no, that the schools have been receiving professional development and they do have all of these resources available to them. So a parent shouldn't have to worry about communicating that there are rule changes that are happening. Mm-hmm. Again, always feel free to call us when it is a question about your child's IEP and mm-hmm. how the rules might affect that specific situation.
And if schools need like further professional development or have questions, they can reach out to the AOE directly. We do have a dedicated helpline that we could also post in the chat too. And if there is an issue with that, you could also look into the administrative complaints mediation webpage for that as well. Thank you, Cassie, for putting in the TA line.
Next question we have is, who at the Agency of Education would we call if we feel that the school is not following these rules?
You could reach out to the TA line. I think that's what Cassie just put in, and we can further direct that call to the necessary people.
Great. So I'm inviting folks to put additional questions in the chat. Thus far, we've answered many of them, most of them. And I will say to folks that some other questions have come up that will be addressed in future sessions. They'll be addressed in future sessions, the second or the third. And let's see, that another question just came in.
I'm happy to speak to this one. Oh, go ahead. If you want to read it out loud, Martha, sorry.
Sure. If related to speech to SLD specifically, a PSW would need and exist high cognition across all domains does not suggest that PSW to consider SLD even if functional skills are weak. Using RTI that would work, but not using PSW, please clarify.
So this is something I want to clarify here, and then we will dive more into this as we go to the next couple of sessions. But specific learning disability has some different criteria for eligibility than other disability categories. And we are going to talk about that at our third session, right? The removal of the discrepancy model and sort of what that looks like. And part of that is that functional skills is being added to the adverse effects section for all other disability categories except for SLD and deafblindness. Again, we're going to go into the specifics of that a little bit more at a future date, but for SLD specifically, functional skills is not, you cannot be found eligible for special education under the basic skill area of functional skills when considering SLD.
Right.
And like I said, we'll get more into that.
Thank you. We've got some other questions coming in. Now they're rolling in. Is the Form 12 in addition to other considerations section on the IEP, which also allows for parental input, i.e. should parental input be included in both sections?
That's really going to be a team decision. There's a particular section where Form 12 information can go, and then there's multiple sections throughout the IEP where other input could live. And sure, other considerations is the place that might be. You know, you might see it in your general PLAS statement or in other areas of the IEP.
Thank you.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, my question, I know this is reserved for the next meeting, but just a question about the functional performance piece. Just wondering if that is something that you have certain like normative assessments that you are wanting schools to use to kind of determine that, or if you're looking more for related services like occupational therapy providers to be making the call in terms of functional performance status with qualifying for special education services?
That's really going to come down to individual schools and districts. We do not prescribe what assessments people have to be using to make these determinations or who has to make those determinations. That's going to be a local team decision.
Okay. Okay, I might have a follow-up question, but
for sure. And when we go, sorry to interrupt, I was just going to say what just came in the chat. We're going to look at some examples of assessments next week when we go through the guidance document that exists related to this topic.
Sure. Yeah, that would be helpful. And is there resources available on the Vermont Families? I was like looking on the website, but I couldn't find any. Are there resources I can access now on the website regarding that change? Yeah.
So for what the AOE has created is going to be on this website that I just put in the chat there. And particular to what we're talking about here, the functional skills guidance, you're going to go to December 2021 to find that document. There's going to be a webinar there and then also a guidance document under December 2021 on that page.
Okay, I'm calling in with that's on the AOE website.
It is. Honestly, the easiest way that I get it to pull up is look up special education rule changes AOE, and it's like the first hit. But I think this is being recorded, and we'll get those links out to you guys as well.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I see Christine's question, and yeah, just so you know too, the caller also in that vein, that side-by-side that we looked at earlier is on that page, and that's under March 2022. So if you scroll down to that March 2022 section, that's where that side-by-side lives.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any additional questions at this time. Do any of our participants have any other questions for our presenters? And again, I'll remind folks that the other webinars will be coming up in future sessions, number 2 or number 3. So if, please pay attention to when those come up and join us.
Thanks,
And-
everyone. And we really appreciate getting the questions ahead of time. So keep them coming. It really helps us with our process.
I just have a question, and maybe you're going to talk about this more the next time, around kids with emotional disturbance that have a son who functions very well as far as academics, like superior in some areas. And he was recently taken off an IEP. And just how that might change, these new rule changes might help us. We've talked about how much time he's missing out of the classroom, academic instruction because of behavioral challenges. And, I asked the school how often they can't tell me how much time he spends out of the classroom. So I'm trying to figure out how to approach this to help him get back on an IEP. Are we going to talk about that a little bit more for kids who have that kind of emotional disturbance diagnosis?
I can't say we're necessarily going to get into individual cases like that
Right.
during these presentations, but I know there's folks at BFN who might be able to work
Right.
through some of that. And you can also reach out to that TA line to work out those pieces.
But does that come under so this is where I get confused with the functional piece. Is that what that would come under?
So you're asking if a student can be found eligible under functional skills.
Right, with the
After July 1.
emotional piece, that would be another way at this point with the new rule changes to.
Possibly. I can't really comment on like how that individual case might land.
Right.
But yes, I mean, the general concept of the rule is that yes, you could be found eligible for specially designed instruction or special education under the basic skill area of functional skills.
Other than the old academic, having to meet the bottom percentile in order to get support.
And there's that change too, Laurel, which we're going to talk about next week. Because yes,
Okay.
there is no longer that 15th percentile starting
Right.
July 1. Mhm.
Right.
And those two things are connected. You're not wrong. They are totally connected.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So there are no more questions, right, Martha?
There's no other questions that I
Okay.
see in the chat.
So I anticipate there'll be a lot more questions in our second and third sessions, and that those will probably run a little longer than this one. This was the first session that doesn't quite get into probably the meat of those two changes that we will see going into effect, well, in a couple of months. So thank you to presenters at the Agency of Education for this information. Everyone should see a link to an evaluation in the chat. Please take a few minutes to complete it so we can make improvements, fulfill our grant requirements. And again, please feel free to send questions ahead of time before our next session next week. So we have other workshops coming up, well, including the next two of this series. You can find details on those on our homepage of our website, the vermontfamilynetwork.org, along with links to previously recorded ones. We have tons of information on our website. Getting connected with us is easy. You can follow us on Facebook or join our closed Facebook page if you are a parent. We have two closed groups, one for all parents of children with disabilities and special health needs, and one for those with adult children. You can also sign up for our monthly e-news or check out our YouTube channel where this will sit after we tidy it up. We are here to help. Contact us at VFN by phone or by email. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great day.